Good morning, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Meisenheimer here again today with you reading another book, Johnny Appleseed, Plants Trees Across the Land. This is by Eric Braun. This book is going to take a little bit longer to read, but this will give you a good bit of information on who Johnny Appleseed was. His real name was John Chapman, wandering planter. When the United States of America was young, much of its land was wild frontier. Pioneers set out to claim land for their families. One of the pioneers was a man named John Chapman. Well, John was born in Massachusetts in the late 1700s, and he spent most of his life wandering in the wilderness of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana. But he wasn't just wandering. Everywhere he went, he planted apple trees. The apple trees John planted provided food for people. Just like John spread apples throughout the land, people spread stories about him. Why, they said he was kind, peaceful, strong, and humble. They called him Johnny Appleseed. After John died in 1845, his stories grew, and Johnny Appleseed soon became an American legend. If you saw John Chapman as a youngin' in Massachusetts, you'd never guess he'd grow up to be a pioneer. Right skinny feller he was. Didn't know how much about traveling or exploring. Yes, sirree. Why, John was as happy as a worm in an apple right there in his dad's apple orchard. One day, John learned about the pioneers heading west to settle new land. Why, they needed apples for food and trading. Soon, John had a dream, and he told his brother all about it. Beautiful apple orchards will rise all over the frontier, he said, grinning with joy, and I will be the one to plant them. What an amazing dream Johnny had, boys and girls. Do you have dreams? John gathered up as many apple seeds as he could. He pulled them from the cider press, and then he asked neighbors for their seeds, and them seeds was like trash to folks. Eventually, he had collected enough seeds, and he put them in a leather bag, and then he headed west. Check out his hat, boys and girls. It's a pan. Now, if you saw John Chapman heading into the wild all alone, you still wouldn't think he looked like much of a pioneer. Shoot, most folks said he was downright funny looking. His long, dark beard was a tangled mess, and he wore a tin pot for a hat and an old coffee sack for a shirt. He didn't even wear shoes. Don't you mind what he looked like, though. He was seeing his dream come true. He headed toward the Ohio River Valley, deep into the frontier. We talked about that Ohio River in the other book that I read to you. John Chapman found a perfect spot along the splashing shores of Licking Creek to start his work. He was the only person around for miles and miles. The trees made a thick web overhead. Clouds of bugs buzzed in the air as he inched his shovel into the soil. John dropped seeds, covered them with dirt, and watered them, and then he moseyed on down the creek to plant more. For years, John walked all over the frontier, planting apple seeds. He got to be a right welcome sight for families living there, and if you think that's because John brought good things with him, well, then you're just a darn tootin'. John sold seeds and trees to those who needed them, and if people didn't have enough money, well, he just gave them what they needed anyway. John didn't bring only apples and trees and seeds. Why, he brought stories and goodwill too. The children always asked, "What did you bring us today, Johnny Appleseed?" And that's what people had started calling him. Johnny Appleseed gave ribbons and other gifts to the children, and he stuck pins in his feet to entertain them. "Oh, my feet are so tough from walking, nothing can hurt them," he said. Ouch! That does not look fun. "Johnny," the adults said, "would you stay in our home tonight? We have a warm fire and a warm meal for you." Johnny Appleseed was so kind and wise, people wanted to help him. But most of the time, he preferred to eat and sleep alone outside, even in the winter. Whew, that'd be cold, boys and girls. No, thank you, he said. The starry sky will be my shelter tonight. I'll cook my meal in my own pot. Oh, you think he washed that after he took it off of his head? Yuck. American Indians even welcomed Johnny Appleseed to their villages. Though natives and pioneers often distrusted each other, they trusted Johnny. He brought them gifts, stories, and good cheer, same as he did everywhere he went. You can plant an orchard with these seeds, Johnny said. After a visit, he'd be on his way, wandering barefoot through the countryside. This was just the way he liked it. One day he was wandering through a field, just to hum a tune to himself, and right then he saw a farmer about to shoot his own horse. What's the trouble? Johnny asked. It's old Bernadette here, the farmer replied. Her legs are broken. Johnny Appleseed knew just what to do. He healed Bernadette's leg and helped her get strong again. People said Johnny could heal anything using nothing but his hands. Not long after he helped that horse, Johnny heard a wolf wailing in pain. Now, if you ever heard that sound, you know it ain't pretty. Ouch! That sound made Johnny plumb sad, so he went into the woods to find that wailing wolf. And when he tracked it down, he saw that it was caught in a hunter's trap. You can bet your apple dumpings he freed that wolf. He fed it and he healed its leg. The wolf was so grateful, it followed Johnny everywhere he went. Boys and girls, what do you think he fed that wolf? Did you say apples? I wonder if that's what he did. Johnny kept on wandering and planting seeds, but now he had a wolf as a pet. Remember when Johnny planted that first seed along Licking Creek? Well, after almost 40 years of planting, the area was a-changing. A whole mess of families had settled in the woods, towns and churches had popped up. Roads split the forest, and stagecoaches carried more folks into the area. The coaches also carried food. Not only that, but Johnny's apple trees were growing all over the land. He decided it was time to make the long walk to Indiana. That was the frontier now, and that was where he and his apple seeds were needed. He's still barefoot, boys and girls. In the summer of 1947, Johnny spent the night with a kindly family in Indiana. He told them stories before bed, and he must have been plumb tuckered out because he stayed with them in their warm house that night. And in the morning, when the family woke, Johnny was still lying by the fire. His limbs were as strong as tree branches. His skin was as shiny as an apple. Johnny Appleseed had grown very old, and his time here on earth was up. It was a right sad day, but not too sad. After all, Johnny Appleseed had followed his dream. When you see an apple orchard or you bite into a shiny red delicious, you can close your eyes and thank him. Now here's a little bit of information about Johnny Chapman. John Chapman was born on September 26, 1774 in Leominster, Massachusetts. When he was about 15 years old, he moved with his family to western Pennsylvania. Why, a few years later, he began planting apple seeds on the frontier. Within a few years, he was famous among the pioneers. His seeds, trees, and apples helped them survive. John had become very wealthy from selling these things. He owned much land and kept his money in jars instead of a bank, but he continued to live simply. All across the frontier, stories about Johnny Appleseed spread by word of mouth. And by the time he died in 1847, many of those stories told of him as a magical, larger-than-life man. The first published story about Johnny Appleseed appeared in Harper's New Monthly magazine in 1871. The author, W.D. Haley, told the famous stories about Johnny, and in 1928, the poet Vachel Lindsay published a poem, Johnny Appleseed, that celebrated Johnny's life. Since then, Johnny Appleseed had inspired many stories, poems, plays, and movies, and they all describe John as generous, strong, and brave. And that's why Americans still remember him today, because Johnny Appleseed is a symbol of American courage and kindness. The end. That is the story of Johnny Appleseed by Eric Braun, publisher, Picture Window Books.